Pleasure always to share Simchas and Rachel. And I don't know her last name. If somebody knows her last name, please help us out here. But Rachel's youngest son is getting married to Yudalit Elul, and that is a huge Simcha. We wish the Chasana Kala, all of the Rebbe's Brach should be Mekuyim, and that Rachel and her husband and her family should have enormous and endless Chassidish Nachas. Today's Sicha on Parshas Seitze is Aleph, Sicha Aleph, from Krach, from volume 29, Chav Test. And we deal here with one of 74 mitzvahs in this, a few of the 74 mitzvahs in this Parsha, with the mitzvah of Klayim, of not mixing certain things that the Eibusher does not want us to mix. Aleph. Tekef achar hatzivoy al isur shatnez. Immediately after the commandment that prohibits shatnez, the combination of wool and linen in one garment, it says lo slabe shatnez tzemer pishtim yachdav. You shouldn't wear shatnez, which is the combination of wool and linen. Nitztavinu bekasov. The next verse tells us gedilim tasa lechal arba kanfes kesuscha, that you should make what we refer to as tzitzis, fringes, on the four corners of your garment. And from the close proximity, the juxtaposition of these two psukim, one upon the other, so the Gemara learns that gedilim tasa lecha af min haklayim, that when you make tzitzis, you can make it even from klayim, even from the forbidden mixture of wool and linen. Sheklayim hutru b'tzitzis, because klayim is, again, this forbidden admixture is permitted when it comes to tzitzis. And al derech zematzinu hetek klayim b'vigdei kohuna. And in the same vein, we find that there is an allowance that it's permitted to use this forbidden, otherwise forbidden mixture of shatnez in the vestments, in the clothing of the Kohanim. She'echad mibigdei hakuna shaloivshim hakahanim b'avoidasam b'mikdash haya avneit. One of the garments that the Kohanim wore when they worked in the Mikdash was the belt, shahaya asui shatnez, that was made out of wool and linen, the combination. V'tzarich lahavin, and we have to understand. Gimel mine klayim yeshnam. There are three types of klayim that are delineated in the Torah, and they're delineated in our parsha and in Parshas Kedoshim. One is bekarka. One has to do with the earth, with agricultural mixture. Ubepema, with animals. Ubevgadim, and in clothing. Umana makasov kan behem shemechad, and they are enumerated in one continuum. It says like sizra karmacha klayim goimer. You should not engage in grafting or in hybridization. And this means that you shouldn't allow an ox and a donkey to plow together. And loisil bashatnis, and you should not wear shatnis. There it says your animals should not be crossbred. Kilayim satcha loisizra. Oh, I'm sorry. You shouldn't crossbreed your animals. And you shouldn't graft two species together or hybridize them together. And a garment made of a combination that is called shatnez, of wool and linen, should not come upon you. The imkain. And if this is so, that we have twice in the Torah 3 prohibitions that are listed. My taima, what is the reason? Hetera kloi begodim b'avodas hamikdash. Hetira. Why does the Torah permit this combination when it comes to this forbidden combination, generally forbidden combination in clothing? Why does it allow it to be worn by the Kohanim when they do their service in the Mikdash, and also the mitzvah tzitzis? Masha Enkain, in contradistinction, Shar Beis Minek Klayim, the other two forbidden admixtures, Bebhema Bakarka, with animals and with the earth, Loy Matzinu Shahutru B'mitzvah Bekachim B'mikdash Ketz Mazeh. We didn't find that those forbidden mixtures are permitted even within a holy context. So I guess doing what we are doing now, where we look at the review or the outline. Thank you so much, Tippa. This is yet another thing she's taken on. In this week's parsha, we find the prohibition against shatnez, which is followed up immediately by a pasuk about making tzitzis. And from the close proximity of these two psukim, the Chachamim derived that you can make tzitzis even from shatnez. And the same thing is true about the big day kahuna, the avnate, the belt, was also made of shatnez. So why does the Torah make this exception concerning shatnez? An exception that is not similarly extended to the other forbidden mixtures named in this parsha, namely crossbreeding animals and grafting or hybridization of crops. Even within a specifically consecrated context, like to offer a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash, there is no allowance to the other forms of klayim. So this is the question of the first seif of the first section. Beis. Milvad gimel mine klayim hanal. Apart from the three above mentioned or listed types of forbidden admixtures, yeshna iser noisef hadoime b'teichne le'iser klayim. There's another prohibition that is conceptually aligned with these, and that is basar b'chalav, mixing meat and milk. Ukemivor b'sfarim, and as it's mentioned in Svarim, shatam ha'iser de basar b'chalav hu kisoid haklayim, that the reason for forbidding meat and milk has to do with the same kind of secret of that's embedded in the other forbidden mixtures. Ta'aruvos beis minim, the mixing of two different types. Shekol echad b'fnei atzmai mutar. Each one independently is permitted. Ella shebis arvusam yachad nasim him davar asur. But when they are combined, it becomes forbidden. Umatzinu b'mechilta, and concerning this fourth type of forbidden mixture that the Rebbe has now brought into the conversation, we find in mechilta sheyesh kasal kidaitach lahatir basar b'chalav b'mukdashin, that there is a kasal means that there's a possibility, that the possibility is entertained, that you should be permitted to utilize the combination of meat and milk within a consecrated rubric, like to bring as a korban or as some other way in the mikdash. Ela she'anu darshin as a kasuv, but Mechilta concludes that we learn from the pasuk which says Reishis gomer tavi beis Hashem Elokecha. There's a pasuk that says that you should bring the first of your crops to the house of Hashem, and right away it follows up lois vashel gedi b'chelav imai. So we learn from the juxtaposition of these two psukim, the proximity of these two psukim, shagam beveis Hashem Elokecha yeshna le'isur basar b'chalav, that even in the Beis Hamikdash, the prohibition is still forbidden of meat and milk. So the Rebbe says, if so, v'nimtza shegimel chalukos b'davar. So we have four forbidden admixtures, which are going to fall into three categories. First, Biklai bigodim shatnez. When it comes to the forbidden mixture in terms of clothing called shatnez, heitira hatira klayim b'avodas hamikdash v'yasera mizut tzif salze u b'mitzvah tzitzis. So in this first category, which shatnez falls into, it's forbidden generally, but the Torah permits it for the purpose of the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. The Kohanim were able to wear it, and also tzitzis. And in the parentheses, notice that the Rebbe says it's more than just permits; it's commanded. Then the second category, bevasar b'chalav, yesh kasal kidaitich lahati b'mukdashin. Now, when it comes to the forbidden mixture of meat and milk, there's the possibility is floated. Okay, it's considered that it should be permitted in a consecrated framework. Ella shalamedim me'akasav shadavar asur. But after the Chachamim considered this, they say, no, we can't do it. We learn it from juxtaposition of two psukim. And the third category is klei behemo klei karka. That is the crossbreeding of animals and the grafting or hybridization of different species, agricultural species. Ein milchatchila kol kosal kidaitech latir b'mukdashin. There's never, from the very beginning, there's no thought, there's no possibility of permitting this. Ve'ein tzarech afilu limit al zeh. And it's not just that it's not even brought up as a possibility, but it's so clear as day that the Chachamim don't need to bolster their thesis with bringing a pasuk or proof. It's just forbidden. The Darish beer. The Rebbe says, so now that we have listed the three categories, we need to understand. When you understand the concept, the underpinnings of these prohibitions, it's all the same. Ta'arubas shnei minim. Shekol echel la'atzmei heterhu. In all four cases, it's the same principle. You're mixing two elements, you're mixing two principal items, both of which are permitted independently, but together become forbidden. So if it's all the same principle, then why do we find that practically in terms of the halachic posture towards these combinations, you actually have three different categories? It would seem that they would all fall into the same category. So in the outline, in the second sif, the Rebbe says that there's yet another form of prohibited mixture, which, like kilayim, is comprised of two things that are each independently kosher, but forbidden when combined, and that is basar b'chalav, meat and milk. Now, these four above named admixtures fall into three categories. The first is shotness, which is forbidden. Okay, I need an editor desperately. There should have been a comma. There's a lot of problems. Okay, shotness is forbidden, but it's permitted via instruction from the Torah to be used in making tzitzis and the kohen's garments. Then you have the second category, milk and meat in combination, which comes under consideration for use in the Beis Hamikdash, but is ultimately forbidden. And then there's the third category, crossbreeding and hybridization, about which there's never even a thought of allowance. And the Rebbe's question is, why are these forbidden mixtures, all seemingly based on the same principle of not combining different types, treated in three different ways? Why is this broken down in three different categories? So in Gimel, the Rebbe says, "V'yuvan zeh al pi divrei haramban," and we'll gain insight into this first through reviewing the words of the Ramban. Shedafke b'negel levishas shatnis amru Chazal shehi mehadvarim sheyetzahara v'umas ha'olam meshivim aleihem. It's dafka shatnis and not the other forbidden combinations that leads the other nations and our yetzahara to kind of taunt us, to goad us, and to say, "Wait, this is crazy." The lo yamru came b'negel l'klei behema, and they don't taunt us. They don't bother us about the isser, the prohibition of crossbreeding. And the Ramban explains, Umavar betama davar, and explains what's the reason. Shebeklai begadim shatnis tama isser hunela. Because the reason for prohibiting shatnis is completely obscure. It's completely shrouded. Like, really, why is God offended by a mixture of wool and linen in your skirt or your sweater? Like, who is that bothering? But when it comes to grafting and crossbreeding, there's a way to understand this logically, and that is that when God created all of the creatures in their different species, their different types, hine bitzmachim ubali nefesh, nasam behem koyach hatolda sheyiskaimu haminim v'tziva sheyetziu liminehem. When God created all of these aspects of vegetation and of animal life, Hashem gave them the power of generation, of propagating the species, and commanded them that they should propagate according to their type. And therefore, kasher adam ma'arif klayim, when a person mixes types, Markiv beis mine behema, when you combine two types of animals, oy beis mine zroim, or two types of crops. Shal yedeze yishtanu betivam v'gam betsurasam b'yosem yonkim zemizeh. And so what you're doing is you're changing their form, you're changing their nature. Via kol garim mimenu ki'ilu hukam mishnei minin. And any seed that they give forth in the future is going to be a combination. So what happens is harehu mishana umakchish. You're changing and you're denying God's stewardship, like God's ownership of creation. And you're mixing in Maisa Bereshis, in the creation of the world, and that's not in your toolbox. That's not permitted. That's not our jam to mix in how God created the world. And here in the brackets, the Rebbe says, okay, we understand about crossbreeding, but then we also saw that we have a prohibition against using two types of animals to plow in the field together. And it's explained, because it's the way of, farmers and people that work their earth to bring their whole herd to one barn, and then they're going to mate with these different animals that you used in the field together. If you bring them all into one barn, then invariably they're going to mate. And so that's why the Torah says that you can't work them together. Yeah, the question, when a non-Jew does mix them, we are permitted to eat, and we're all eating nectarines and all kinds of tomatoes and all kinds of other things that have been grafted. V'nimtza sheyesh chiluk ikri ben klei behema, klei karka, levein klei begadim. So we find that there is an axiomatic difference between mixing animals, mixing agricultural species, and on the other hand, shatnez. Because beklai behemo, klai karka, ha'iruvu gam bekoyach hatoilda, the beis haminim. Because when it comes to crossbreeding or hybridization, you're actually impacting the power of generation. V'hainu, this means sha'iruv poyel beikram, that the combination that you've effected goes to their core. Be'etzem mitziusam, it changes them inherently. And therefore, this is contradictory to the order of how Shem created the world, that each species should give forth its own species specifically. But when it comes to shatnez, when you mix two types of materials, the combination does not impact the essence of the existence of the wool and the linen. Ella iruv chitzoni bilvad. It's a topical thing. It's a more external thing. All you did was combine them together in one garment. But even afterwards, they remain wool and linen independent from each other. And therefore you can separate one from the other. So in fact, that's what happens when you give a garment to check for shatnez. What they do is they'll take out the linen typically. So the Rebbe is saying that there's a very big difference in these mixtures. The third section. The Ramban teaches that it's only about shatnez of the nations of the world and the Yetzer Hara. I should have put in taunt the Jews. Not interfering in Hashem's design by blurring distinctions between different types for flora and fauna, it's logical. Not so the prohibition of shatnez. This crucial distinction allows us to appreciate the difference between crossbreeding or grafting and shatnez. In the case of crossbreeding and hybridization, you are changing the essential power of generation. When you fuse two species, the result will be a different species. You interfere with the natural order of generation according to individual species. The combination of wool and linen in one garment, on the other hand, is a combination that is topical and therefore reversible. So it's a completely different type of combination. Dalit. Al pizeh move on. So once we appreciate the difference, we can understand shegeder hataruvas bevasar b'chalav hu ke'ein oifen mimutza ben beis oifane taruvas hanal. So now what the Rebbe says is, you understand the profundity of the mixture that's effected through crossbreeding or grafting different species together. Then you have, on the other side of the spectrum, you have shatnez, which doesn't essentially change the nature of the two principal entities. And then in the middle, the Rebbe says, you have this fourth forbidden mixture of meat and milk. How so? Ta'aruvas basar v'chalav eina min hasug deklai behema v'chulei hanagea b'koyach hatoilada. Because the mixture of milk and meat doesn't fall in the same category as crossbreeding or grafting, which is going to impact the generation. Bigidol v'hatzmicha l'dairis, in the growth and the sprouting for generations to come. But what it does impact basar b'chalav is on the meat and the milk that you're dealing with. So it impacts the physical properties at the time, but it doesn't change the essential nature that will ripple forth until the end of time. So that's the way that it's different from klayim of behemoths and karka. Amnam li'idach, but on the other hand, gam ein ze b'daim l'shatnez. But it's also not the same category as shatnez. Why? Shechein b'shatnez ein iruv gamor debeis minim tzemer pishtim. Because when you talk about shatnez, there's absolutely no combination of the tzemer and the wool and the linen. Kinal, as we said above. Masha enkin, in contradistinction b'vasar b'chalav, when it comes to meat and milk, ha'isur min ha'torah hu davka kishemivashlam yachad ve'echad noisin tam b'chaveri. But what's the isur? When you cook them together and they become infused one in the other. The yeser okain afilu tare le kulei yoima bechelba, even if hishru basar b'chalav kol hayom, if you soaked meat in milk a whole day, she'az yav beitaima, then you infuse the taste into it, and the halacha is kavush kimevushal, that when you marinate, when you soak something, it's like you're cooking it. But and ein baze isur min haTorah, this is a isur from the Chachamim, ela dafka derech bishul asur Torah. But it's specifically when you cook them together that the Torah is it prohibits it. And I remember when microwaves burst on the scene, there was a question about if microwaving could be considered cooking. In other words, there was no question that you can't eat it. The question was, is it isur deraisa, isur darbanan? Same thing with cooking an egg on the sidewalk in the sun. Because the Isser Basar B'chalav applies only in a way where these two minim, the meat and the milk, become a third mitzias, a third existence, a new existence, v'zen nasa de bishul dafka. And that is effectuated through cooking specifically. And we might explain that this is the reason for the opinion of Reb Levi, Shashir Kazayas de Isser Basar B'chalav, that the forbidden mixture Basar B'chalav is forbidden in a Kazayas. And he says, Hugam kishayeshna rak chatzi zayis basar v'chatzi zayis chalav. Kazayis mi bein shneihem. Okay? You don't have a kazayis of the meat, you don't have a kazayis of the milk, you only have a half kazayis of each, but it's still asur. You have one kazayis between the two. Lefi shasham ha'isr chal lo yala basar k'shalatzmai Because what's prohibited is not the meat in itself, not the milk. You're talking about kosher meat, you're talking about kosher milk, but when they're fused, when they become one, that's when it's prohibited. Al shneim yachad. B'yoisem mitzios achas de basar bechalav. They become one existence of meat in milk. The combination of meat and milk is yet another category that falls between the two above mentioned categories. It's not a combination that can be reversed because the meat becomes suffused with the milk, which cannot be extracted, like separating wool from linen. But it's not a combination that affects future reproduction. In Seif Hey, the Rebbe says, Yeduim Divrei Rabbeinu Bachya. The words of Rabbeinu Bachya are well known. She'inyan Isser Klayim Hu, Loi Ra Ka'irvu Begashmias, that the prohibition of forbidden mixtures is not only, or maybe you could say, it's not in the main. I don't want to add words. It's not only the forbidden physical mixture, elagam ma shema'arvev hakeches helyenim, but rather this physical mixture is forbidden because it mirrors a mixture, an amalgam of spiritual energies, haklayim, that become combined, and chibur shnei ktavashem shnei hafchim ein chibur and oila yafa. And by combining these two extreme energies, these dichotomous energies, their union is not positive. It's not good. He also explains this regarding the forbidden combination of meat and milk. That the construct of meat on the one hand and the construct of dairy on the other are simply like examples and allusions to specific things in the supernal realm. V'taruvas basar b'chalav lamata, and when you mix meat and milk below in this world, pa'elas irvuv shel dvarim hahem asher kol echad ve'echad tzarich liyos miyuchad b'fnei atzmai. So what you do is your mixture of meat and milk in this world has cosmic impact, and it causes an admixture above of things that need to remain distinct and separate. Ukimevoran, as explained, shetzemer ufishtim, valder zeh shor v'chamor, basar v'chalav. So all of these things that need to remain separate, raimzim al chesed ugevura. They allude to the energy of chesed and gevura, respectively. Shehem midas hafchis, and those are dichotomous, opposing midas expressions, energies. The lachein ein chiburin yafa, and therefore their combination doesn't end well. And based on what we did above, in explaining the difference between crossbreeding and hybridization on one hand, and shatnez on the other, move on. It's understood that when it comes to the mixture of kayches elyonim de chesed gevura, of these supernal energies of chesed and gevura, she'ein chibur and oila yafa, which they don't mix well. Yeshna chiluk ikri ben beis hasugam anal, val derech zeh b'negei lebasar b'chalav. So the Rebbe delineated three categories in these forbidden admixtures, and he says that this mirrors three categories above of how in the celestial heights these things don't mix well. There are three levels in Chesed and Gevura mixtures, and just how no good it is. Section 5, Rabbeinu Bachya explained that these prohibited admixtures mirror celestial energies that do not mix well. The physical mixture on the earthly plane causes a deleterious mixture above. Specifically, it is the admixture of Chesed and Gevura, and the variations in terms of prohibition cited above reflect differences in the supernal amalgam of these energies and forces. Vav. The Yuvon behektim tmiya l'chayer. And we'll understand this better first by raising a question. Tmiya is like a wonder. L'chayer, seemingly, there's a big question. Alabira amor sheklayim hu chibur shnei ktava shehin shnei hafchim. On the above stated explanation in Sehif Hey that you can't mix these things because they represent dichotomous energies and forces, and mixing them is not going to lead to good things. The Rebbe says it's a pella, it's a tmiya, it's a wonder. Sip, I think your question is going to be answered momentarily. The Rebbe says, "Matzinu shechibro shel shnei hafchim hu adrabe ma'ila achi nifla." We find that the union of two opposing factors, on the contrary, it's always seen as a wondrous mila. It's a great thing. It's a good thing. Inyan hashalom, it brings to peace. Or like Tipa was saying about Teferes, if you look at the spheres, so the middle kav, the middle vector, is where the balance lies. That's always the best part, right? So the right and the left has very good things, but if you don't have a balance, then you're completely out of kilter and it's unstable. So we always think of that as being the best thing ever. We have this tremendous teaching that the whole purpose of Torah is to bring shalom, is to bring peace, is to bring unity, is to bring balance. The echad mikari havodahu lifoil hiskalalus hamidas, and one of the primary aspects of avodah in general is to bring inter-inclusion in our midas, to bring us to this balanced, stable, perfect golden means. Ukiyadu habir b'maymer Chazal. And as is well known, the explanation in what Chazal teach us in Gemara Tainis, la'olam yehei adam rach kekana, a person should always be soft as a reed, va'al yehei kasha ke'eres, and they shouldn't be strong or hard or steadfast like the cedar. That's unyielding and unbending. Sha'adam hu bal midas, person has midas, a person has emotive aspects, ela shemidas of tzriches liyos rakos, but they have to be yielding, malleable, flexible. V'hainu. This means shekol mida noisenes makoim lemida hahafches. What does it mean when you have good midas? What it really should mean when we use that term is we have the right combination, because each mida is yielding or giving space, or in today's vernacular, holding space for the opposing midah. Valderech hamevor b'Rambam, like the Rambam explains, shaderech hayishara hu midah beinish shebechol deya v'deya. The Rambam says the golden means, the middle path. Ve'ech anu aimim kan shetoichen iser klayim hu irvuv hamidas dechesed gevura. So this seems to like fly in the face of everything we're constantly learning. That Teferes is beauty because it's the combination of Chesed and Gvura, and so on and so forth. Umevor Bazan, it's explained, Sheskalalus Hamidas Bikdusha, Hial Derech Taruvas Min Beminoi. That when you have inter-inclusion of midas in a holy realm, in a holy context, then it's like mixing one species with its same species. It's mixing one kind with the same kind. Lefi shachol inyani kedusha hakol hu min echad habitul v'achna elov yisbarach. Because when it comes to kedusha, it's all one unified field. Everything is in a state of bitul v'achna. It's all nullified and abnegated before Hashem. And therefore we find Shabbavedus Hashem Yishkinu Beis Hamidas HaHafchiyos Chesed Gvura Yachad. So when it comes to serving Hashem, so both Chesed and Gevura can dwell side by side together without interrupting or bothering each other. Like the Sifri explains on the pasuk V'Haftas Hashem Elokecha, Ein lecha ava b'mokem yira, v'yira b'mokem ava, ella b'midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu bilvat. That usually you can't have ava where you can't have love where you have awe, and you can't have awe where you have love, except when it comes to serving Hashem. Masha Enkein binyanei olam, but when you're talking about pedestrian things of the world, to get their olam, and what is olam? The whole category of olam, miloshon, helam, behester, right? Olam is a place where godliness is obscured. That's why it's called olam, helam. So how does the olam operate? Mashamargish atzmai lemetzius. Everything in this world feels its existence. The only reason that you can do a mitzvah with something because that something is defined in a certain way. That means it feels its mitzvahs. So you could do a mitzvah with dalid minim because those dalid minim are different than all the other minim. But where you don't have distinction, where you don't have delineation, because you don't have a sense of self and a recognition of self, where there's no definition, you can't call out certain species and say, do this mitzvah with this or with that. Chani is saying that there's fascinating implications for relationships in this. Absolutely. I'll just say very, very quickly that, usually people are told that the only way to succeed in marriage is by engaging in compromise. And when you think about that for more than a nanosecond, it's completely off-putting. So basically, you're telling me I'm entering into a situation where for the rest of my life, or as many decades as God gives me, God willing, I'm only going to get 50% of what I want. So that's not appealing. But when you say that to be successful in marriage, you have to have bittul, it means that you have to have certain things that you share that are overarching and that are more important than both of you. They're transcendent. And you're both mivatal to those things. And when you agree on what those things are, so whether it's my way or it's his way, we're both getting what we want because ultimately we want that same overarching thing, that transcendent thing. So absolutely profound implications. I'm opening the chat because I didn't catch Tzippa saying, I was thinking that in parenting, you might have Ava and Yira at the same time. So tell us more about that later in the Farbrengen. Okay. Okay. So where are we? Okay, I'm going back to the beginning of the paragraph. But in when it comes to the worldly plane and every aspect thereof feels its own existence, so there the construal of each emotive aspect is in its fullest strength. And that strength doesn't give space to the opposite midah, ubefrat to another midah, and specifically lemida hafchis, to its opposing midah. V'lachein ein lecha abba b'makom yira v'yira b'makom ava. So when you're feeling intense love, you're not feeling intense awe. When you're feeling intense awe, you're not feeling intense love. So when you have in the world a combination of two opposite aspects, so this is called combining two different species. Masha Enkim Bikdusha. But in contrast, when it comes to Kedusha, the Kedusha in Yana Bitul, the whole Indian of Kedusha is Bitul. Another way of understanding what does it mean that something is holy is that something is transparent to its source. It's completely bottle to its source. When you look at it, you see Geplichkeit. So when you look at a Sefer Torah, you see Geplichkeit. When you look at a table, you see a table. Now, it could be used for Kedusha, it could be used Chas Chalil, the opposite, but it's not transparent to its source. So kedusha is about bittul. So in that space, ein hamidas hahafchi is the chesed and gevura des besnagda zulazu. So there, these two midas of chesed and gevura don't stand in opposition to one another. Kim adrab, on the contrary, hein be'emes min echad. Truly, they are one type, they are one kind, they are one species. Teichnan v'inyanan shel beis hamidas hu echad v'yachad avodas Hashem. Because it's all about one thing, serving Hashem. Al derech divrei Chazal al pasuk, and this is in line with what Chazal taught on the pasuk Eisa Shalom B'Mreima. What does it mean that Hashem makes peace in the celestial, in the elevated heights? Michal sar shel mayim, v'Gavriel sar shel eish, ve'ein mechavim zeh zeh. Hashem makes shalom between Michael, who's the prince of water, and Gabriel, who has sovereignty over fire, and they don't cancel each other out. They don't extinguish each other. Because when they stand before God, they don't feel the strength of their independent existence. Elarak es hiyosam shluchav shel hamelech Kadosh Baruch Hu. But rather, they feel the way in which they are deputies or dispatched by Hashem. Umemela ein kol nigud beinehem umin echad heim shluchei hamelech. And therefore, there's no opposition between them. There's no clash. They're all one species. What's that species called? Shluchei hamelech. So in section 6, to better understand this, we must address why combining two different forces would be seen as anything less than positive. Conventionally, we think of that as the ideal, bringing peace by fusing different forces. The Rebbe explains that when it comes to holiness, there are no true distinctions, as all forces, no matter how divergent they might be, submit to Hashem. Indeed, holiness is a space that can hold dichotomous emotions and energies. But when talking of the pedestrian realm in which each aspect of reality asserts its individuality, very much quote-unquote feels itself, there can be no true admixture without negative fallout. And in the next seif, the Rebbe is going to give us two different types of negative ramifications of mixing dichotomous forces. Zayin. Al pizeh yuvan hachiluk ben beis hasugim anal b'klayim. Once we understand that physical klayim is really just a reflection and devolves from, is a reflection of and devolves from the admixture of celestial forces, which can have deleterious consequences. So now we can understand the difference between the two types of klayim that the Rebbe spoke about before, klay behema v'karka or klay begadim. The difference between how halacha treats crossbreeding and grafting and shotness. When you combine and you mix two opposing things, there are two possibilities, and each one of these possibilities leads to an opposing effect. But there are two possibilities. Aleph, al yidei zeh mizbatlim tiyureim hahafchim v'hasoisrim va'azay b'neihem shalom. One possibility is that each is going to give up its self-construal, as it were, its distinctiveness, and they're just going to melt into one melting pot, one hodgepodge. And then you're going to have shalom, but you lose the distinctiveness. The other possibility is based kol echad nishar b'takfoy gam la'achar chibur shneim yachad. Each one remains vociferously distinct, even when you combine them. Va'az goyim hadavar leplukta machlekes, and then you get discord, then you get conflict. They're both jostling. Ubeis afanim elu boyim l'dei bitui bebeis sugei haklayim. And so these two possibilities find expression in how halacha treats the above-mentioned different categories. The klai behema, klai karka, shematarasam hi lahaili minim Zorim, Mishunim, B'Toildes, when it comes to the crossbreeding of animals and the hybridization of agriculture, whose stated purpose is to actually give birth, as it were, to produce a different type of species. Litzur mibeis haminim metzius chadasha mishuna, to create from two types, from two species, a novel and different type. Hachisorim be'iravu, bekach she'al yadai, he mizbatlim mimetziusam betor beis minim nefradim, kolach lefit chunaisa v'chulei. So what's the problem with this? That each one of the two species has lost its independent form. V'nasem hefach ratzon habayir, sheboram kim minim nifradim. And this results in the opposite of Hashem's desire, which was to create them as distinct and different types. And Hashem wanted each one to remain in their category with their purpose. שאין פירוש על ידי ביטולם למלך ברוך הוא מזבטם תפקידיהם הנפרדים של מיכאל וגבריאל, שר של מים ושר של אש. And going back now to what the Rebbe had put in brackets earlier, he references the idea of Isa Shalom ben. It doesn't mean that their ability to coalesce cancels out their inherent quality. Fire still remains fire, and water still remains water. Canceling out their energy or their distinct characteristic would be Hefach Ratzon HaMelech. It's the opposite of what Hashem, the Melech, wants. But what it does mean is Shekol Echad Noiser Binyanehu Umemale Es Tafkidai Ela Sheyachad Im Zeh Ve'ein Mechaben Zeh Zeh. But what it means is that water remains water and fire remains fire, and yet together, because they're in the presence of Hashem, as it were, they don't cancel each other out. I once learned that that's the reason, one of the reasons why they used to put melach, they used to put salt on every korban, because salt is the product of water and fire. It comes from the ocean, but it has the property of fire, and this is put on the korban because Hashem is the source of nimna hanimnais, where impossible is impossible, where opposing features can be conjoined. Masha ein came b'kloi begodim. But what happens with kloi behema and karka is completely different than what happens with kloi begodim, with shatnez. Hachisaron hu lehefach. Here you have the opposite problem. And that is because the wool and the linen each remain distinct. And the problem is that, as already explained, they're derived from opposing dichotomous spiritual energies, chesed and gevura. And and we're talking about, on the earthly realm, in your skirt, in your jacket, you don't see in a revealed way that there's a bittul of opposing factors, like Isa Shalom b'mrema, and therefore you're mixing two kinds that are distinctly two different kinds. And so what you have from here is the clash. Initial period umachlekes. You have conflict. Yeah, today they're very short seifim, so it's keeping you busy. Zion. So the problem of mixing two different kinds is either the two different elements nullify the distinctiveness in order to coalesce, or they retain their distinctions, which leads to friction. These two negative possibilities are showcased in the two types of forbidden mixtures that are forbidden with no exception. The result of crossbreeding animals or agricultural species is the nullification of their distinctiveness. They cease to be two different species, which is the desire of the creator. On the other hand, the result of blending wool and linen in one garment has the opposite problem. The two materials retain their distinctiveness, and therefore, when not used for Dvar Mitzvah, they clash. Okay, there's a mistake in the second sentence because it should have said, because it says, oh no, okay, it's not clear. It's not written properly because it makes it sound like there's no exception in the two categories. One category being crossbreeding animals, agricultural species, the other being shotness. But that's not what should have been written. It should have been written or showcased in two types of forbidden mixtures that are forbidden. And then go into crossbreeding animals or agricultural species, which is always forbidden, and shotness, which is not forbidden for Dvar Mitzvah. Apologies. Like I said, that's what we need an editor. Okay, Seif Ches. Al pi kol anal yesh levar gam es gimel hachilukim anal b'negei lemikdash. So now we're going to circle back and we're in a position to understand these three categories as they relate to Hekdesh or the Mikdash. Tam ha'heter leklayim b'tzitzis v'chein b'shayches l'avodas hamikdashu. Why is there permissibility, this license granted to use shotness for two mitzvahs or two holy constructs? Lefisha be'inyan shel mitzvah kedusha midas hakadosh baruch hu nase al yidei irvuv shnei hafchim loy piruda machlekes ela adraba shalom va'achdos kenal ba'arucha. Because as explained above at length, when it's in a holy field, when it's in the field of Kedusha, then it doesn't cause conflict. On the contrary, it causes peace and unity. Bamed dvarim amurim bisuk klayim zeh shabaya irvov mevi lidei pirud umachlekes. Where are we? What are we talking about? We're talking about a type of admixture, which the mixture generally leads to separation and discord. But when it's within the context of kedusha and a mitzvah, then it doesn't lead to discord. But then you have the opposite problem. You have a type of mixture where the each type gives up its distinctiveness. It all becomes subsumed in one cholent's pot. It's mevatel hachaluka lemineim esudri habriya. It interferes with how Hashem created the world. Ein kol nafka mina medubar b'dinyei ha'olam oy b'dvar mitzvah kedusha. Here, there's no difference if you're talking about in the physical realm or you're talking about a mitzvah kedusha. V'chol oifen asur sheizbatlu hagvuloi sheheitze b'kadosh baruch hu. In any and all circumstances, it's forbidden to tamper with the parameters that Hashem put up, with the borders that Hashem put up. So now the Rebbe has taken the two extremes. Shotness on the one, where there's allowance for Dvar Mitzvah, and Kloi Behema and Kloi Karka, where there's never an allowance. V'lachein, b'Kloi Behema, Kloi Karka, ein afilu kasal kidaitich lahatirim b'mukdashin. And therefore, there's not even a thought to permit that in a holy construct. V'davke b'basar b'cholov, but it's specifically in that middle space, basar b'cholov, where the distinctiveness has not been subsumed, it's not been fused to the extent that it's lost for future. But it also is not separable. You can't extract the milk from the meat and the meat from the milk once you've mixed them. So in this mixture, and you might have thought that this is closer to shotness, and therefore there should be allowance in the mikdash. Therefore, yesh kos al kidaitach latira b'mikdashin. al derech shat and v'vikuna, aval lemaskana. But in conclusion, Beis Hashem Elokecha lo yisvashel. But because of the juxtaposition of the two psukim, one being that you should bring the first of your crops to the Beis Hamikdash, but that goes right into Lois Vashel Gedi B'Chelav Imoy. So from this, the maskana, the conclusion is the Ma'achat Shaged Basav Cholav Ukanal Yitziras Mitzius Chadasha. So it's true that it doesn't have the same nature as Kloyi Behema Kloyi Karka because it doesn't affect generation. But at that moment, you have effected a new existence called Basar B'Chalav. And so that tips it to that other extreme of klei behema and klei karka, and so it's forbidden even in the mikdash. No, we're now in a position to understand the three categories vis-a-vis hekdesh. Shatnez can be used for tzitzis or in the Beis Hamikdash because that holy space causes the opposing elements to, quote unquote, live in peace. On the other hand, crossbreeding and hybridization are a different category because they upend Hashem's system, and this cannot be tolerated at all, even in the context of a mitzvah. And finally, Basar B'Chalav does come under consideration for possible use in Mikdash, but is ultimately prohibited because unlike the combination of wool and linen, when you mix meat and milk, you actually generate a new entity, which is prohibited even for a Dvar mitzvah. In the final Seif, the Rebbe says, Kasab Rabbeinu Bachya wrote, Sheba'isa hazman l'asir lavoi, yiyeh isur basar b'cholav batel. When Mashiach comes, the prohibition of meat and milk will be batel. You see in a footnote, the Rebbe says that the chazir will become kosher. Rabbeinu Bachya also teaches, Al derech damatzinu shamalachim etzel Avram achlu basar b'cholav. And the malachim, who were celestial entities, ate basar b'cholav. Now, there's two different traditions, so anybody who's having trouble, just want to acknowledge that there are teachings that tell us that they ate first the chalav and then the basar, in conformity with halacha. And then there's other teachings that tell us that they ate them together. And here the Rebbe is bringing down that they belong to a different realm, where there's no isser between these two. Why? And the Rebbe says, let's understand, based on what we said above, why when Mashiach comes, Basar B'Chalav won't be isser, won't be usser. Why the Malachim were able to eat them together. Nizbar Le'il Siv Dalet was explained above in the fourth section of the Sicha, Shemasha Basar B'Chalav Nasim L'Metzius Chadasha, that milk and meat become a new entity, who rak b'negei l'tzad hagashmi v'hachumri shebehem. This is really only in the physical temporal sense. Aval ein ze negei l'koiches shelahem, but it doesn't impact them essentially, like when you crossbreed two animals. A mule can't have a horse. A mule can never have a donkey. It can only have a mule. It doesn't impact lepnimius mitziusam, to their innermost essence or core of their existence. From this is understood. So when it comes to their celestial energies that are connected to the core of their existence, his arvos hi al derech kloi begodim shekol koyach nishar b'mitziusai. So above, in the supernal realm, the mixture of basar v'chalav is more like the mixture of shatnez, where each thing remains separate. And this allows us to understand the difference between now and when Mashiach comes. Now we see only the physical, material corporeal aspect of each thing. And because on the physical level, basar and chalav create a new entity, al karcha tzarich leimar shal pi dinei haTorah shenitna lamata ba'olam hazeh be'eretz dafka neshama beguf harezu taruvas b'daima l'klei behema umemela asur higam b'dvar mitzvah. In this physical world, meat and milk becomes a new existence. The meat becomes saturated with the milk, and the milk takes on the taste of the meat, and you can't extract one from the other. So, as far as we're concerned in our physical existence, and the Torah was given to us in this world, neshama beguf, it's one thing. So it has to be usher. It's more like crossbreeding. It has to be usher even if it's a bar mitzvah. Masha enkin lasid lavoi. But when Mashiach comes, kasher yikoim hayir v'niglak fred Hashem v'ra'u kol basar yachdav ki pi Hashem diber. When Mashiach's going to come, and we're going to have the fulfillment of the Navi Yeshayahu, that Hashem will be revealed to the extent that we will see with our fleshy eyes that the mouth of Hashem speaks. Shenira bechush amitas hametzias de shemayim v'chule hiloi hageshem v'achomer ella b'dvar Hashem. We're going to see the truth that the metzius, that the existence, the truth of all existence is in Dvar Hashem. That's why everything is called a davar, a thing, because every davar is nisava from a Dvar Hashem. But we don't see that now. We see a table, we see chairs. You don't see that. And when you and it's only shal yadai and the Dvar Hashem nasu pi Hashem diber, that's hamahava mechayu mekayim kol nivra. It's only the word of Hashem that brings into existence and vivifies and allows to exist every individual existence. And when we are able to see this and internalize this, and it's as clear as day, then we're going to be able to see the truth about the existence of the combination of basar v'chalav. So we're going to be able to see the truth as dvar havaya. Today we have to believe that there is a dvar havaya that pulsates beneath everything, but then we're going to be able to see it. His hataruvas. And in that time, when we're going to see the dvar havaya, we're going to see that the chesed and the gevura, the meat and the milk, remain separate and apart. And therefore, it's not going to be a forbidden combination. And because at that time the whole world will be refined and the whole world will be holy, v'olam kadosh will be a holy world. On the contrary, ha'iruv debasa b'chalav chesed gvur b'kedusha harei hu inyan hachi na'ala shalom ba'achdos. In that holy unified plane, we'll be able to see how not only is it not forbidden, but it's the highest thing, because it's the fusion, it's the unity of chesed and gevura, it's shalom and achdos. When Mashiach comes, the Isser Basar Chalav will be rendered moot. As explained, the mixture of meat and milk does produce a new prohibited substance, but it does not change the inherent qualities of these two substances. Spiritually, this means that, like the shatnez, the two core features of meat and milk remain spiritually separate and independent. Presently, we experience and see only the physical level, so we see their intertwinement. But when Mashiach comes, we will see the Dvar Havaya that animates all. We will be able to perceive the supernal corresponding energies to meat and milk and how they remain inherently separate, because the whole world will be suffused with holiness. The Chesed and Gevurah will not only coexist, but will bring to a wondrous state of peace and wholeness. Yes, yield to our sterile Mashi. As soon as I said that, I